Yep. Okay.
You guys are brave between the cold and the snow, dark. It's just the masks. It's really nice to just stay home.
And sometimes it's really nice to get out of your house.
Mute your computer and then turn your volume all the way down.
Computer or on here?
On your computer. Score set, Mark. Okay.
All right.
We're good now.
You guys ready? All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting for February 9th, 2021. Our board members and members of the district's administrative team are participating in a hybrid meeting as there is currently a requirement of group sizes in an effort to limit the spread of COVID-19. As a public body, the Lake Bluff Board of Education is subject to the Illinois Open Meetings Act. Prior to this meeting, a public announcement was posted on our website announcing various participation options, including asking questions ahead of the meeting using a Google form. Any viewers watching the meeting on Zoom may also raise their hand when we have public comment sessions, and you can ask your questions or make your comments live. While the requirements of the Open Meetings Act have been relaxed during the global pandemic, the members of the Board of Education take their responsibilities as board members who are responsible to the public no less seriously. Leanne, could you please call the roll?
Andy Duran.
Present.
Ann Hill.
Present.
Mark Berry.
Present.
Leanne Charlotte present. Julie Gottschall.
Present.
Richard Haag.
Present.
John Marsden.
Present.
It's everybody.
All right, all present and accounted for. We have a quorum. We can begin. Let's begin. We haven't done this in a while because we have some folks in, excuse me, frog in my throat, in town hall. Please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks. I would offer the opportunity for anybody watching to make public comment. If you would like to, you just have to, if you're watching on Zoom, you have to raise your hand and we will allow you in the room to speak. Shelley, was there any written comment on the Google form?
At this time.
Not at this time, okay. And I'm not seeing any hands going up in the audience. You will have the chance to make public comment at the end of the meeting as well if anything catches your eye. So we will move ahead and move on, give the board the opportunity to either offer a future agenda item, something they think we need to cover, or if there's a brief discussion item that need to be raised and briefly discussed today, please do so now. If not, you can always contact myself or Dr. Leali, and we could bring items to the future meetings after you bring it to our attention. So we're going to begin. This is all discussion tonight, and we will begin with, I believe, Mr. Khan going to lead that the staffing presentation, the licensed staffing presentation, or is that you, Dr. Leali?
I'll start us off, and then Jay is going to go ahead and project the information that you received last week. So
Lisa, you're a little soft. It's a little hard to hear you.
Is that better?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to begin talking a little bit about staffing for next school year. This is the right time of year to do it, although it's a little bit difficult for us this year, not knowing exactly what next fall will look like. But at this point, we are presenting a pretty solid staffing plan for our licensed and certified teachers, with a bit of an increase that we're looking at in our special education department. And we do have an influx of some additional students with significant needs that we need to support. And again, you know, we are looking at different ways to do this. We in our district have partnered in the past with NSSED to provide us some additional support for our staff in this area, and we are also looking at that as an option for next year. And we are also looking for some additional support in the area of speech. And that's again for our licensed personnel. But other than that, there are no significant differences between last year's staffing and this year's. I don't know if Jay or Tracy want to add anything to that.
Lisa, I just want to comment about one of the questions I can imagine people having is that I think we see the enrollment going down, if I'm looking at the numbers correctly, and yet the FTE going up. And what I understand from past years is that's a function of the needs of the particular students. And we have, I hear you saying we have some students coming in that are high need individuals. And then, you know, we have always the particular mandates that there are certain things that we have to provide services in school. And then we have certain, as a third reason, electives that we want to provide, and to have the, particularly in the middle school, the options available, it necessitates a certain head count. So, you know, I don't know if I've encapsulated it or if there's more to say on that point, but I do imagine that's going to be, you know, could be on someone's mind. So, you know, if there's anything to add.
Yeah, Julie, I'll
Yeah,
address that. I think that so the staffing is based really bottom up from our student enrollment. And we looked at the elementary school, and that enrollment is pretty stable in terms of total enrollment. We have some bubbles of students moving from one grade to another. So numbers of sections are changing within a grade level, but net we had the same number. And I think at the middle school, you know, we talk about this every year, and we have Nate come and do his presentation about the middle school and the team teaching model and all of the constraints we put on ourselves because we want to offer fine arts within the day and lots of other activities. And so although our student enrollment goes down at the middle school, it's very difficult to adjust our staffing there. So I think in net, just given the numbers of students we have, we're not seeing a change that's significant enough to change our base staffing level. And then, as you mentioned, there is then, you know, we have need for supplemental support for students based on their needs, and we try to do it within the staffing we have. And sometimes it's necessary based on what's in IEPs to add staff. You know, we are looking at, we will have a discussion, especially in the future, about our class sizes and whether it is smart to maintain really low general class sizes, or is it better to have slightly larger class sizes and supplement that with specialists who can really give you additional help in areas of math or reading or English language learning, you know, because I think that we're finding that it requires more specialization in order to meet the needs of all kids. That maybe the general classroom teacher can't do that, and we'd be better served to look at maybe shifting our resources and looking at class sizes so that we could keep total FTE the same and still provide the type of education that is expected in Lake Bluff. And we're just that, you know, equity ties into that, and we're just starting to have those conversations. So that's something that we are cognizant of and we'll be looking at closely.
That'll be an interesting discussion. Do you have any sense of when the board will be hearing about that?
I think
I'm
this
wondering
is
if it'll be during my term. That's my question.
I think they all tie very closely together, programming, class sizes, and the student needs that we have. And I think everybody can agree at this point, given where we are in the year and where our kids have been for the last 9 to 12 months, that we have some work to do to assess our needs moving into the next school year and what supports our students will need when they return to us in lots of different areas, not just academics, but also the social emotional piece. So I think for us as a system, we're looking to assess first and find out where the needs really are, and then have some conversations as an administrative team about what we think would be best in terms of support, and then bring that discussion to the board. I know that class sizes is something that we've talked about in the past, and that is something that we'll need to continue the discussion on as we look at our total FTE.
I would comment on that class size tangent a little bit by saying if we're going to start discussing that, know that has, in my time on the board, that's been treated like kind of a sacred cow. You want to be really careful there. It's something that the community has grown to expect. There's no written requirement that we keep class sizes at what they are, but it's been an informal agreement we have with the community. I would suggest, in the same vein as the way you've involved stakeholders in conversations about return to learn, I would suggest getting stakeholders involved in that conversation as well, because it was potentially filled with landmines.
And Mark, I'm not suggesting that we're going to be changing class sizes now or even in the next couple of years. I'm just stating that we have to look at this all as one big picture and
Yeah.
understanding that class sizes are very important and what's the best way to deliver services while just keeping an eye on. I understand there's not a open checkbook and we can just hire as many staff as we want. So we need to be smart about it and definitely involve the community and the board. I mean, we did a whole strategic plan on it and it's not something that would ever be changed lately, but it's just as we embark on this new, equity piece and the new, looking at forward at modifying our strategic plan, that's going to be part of the conversation.
And I think it should. I'm not arguing or positioning against or for anything. I'm just passing along some history that Lisa may or may not be aware of. So,
Absolutely. I appreciate it. And then if there are no other questions on the licensed staffing proposal at this point, the non-licensed staffing plan is a bit more in flux as we look at what our programming and model might look like next
Lisa?
year, and we'll go into a little bit. Yep.
Lisa, could you, before you start, for the huge viewing audience, could you define what you mean by non-licensed staff? What does that mean?
Sure. So these are our non-teaching positions. These are the support staff that we have in our building. As you can see, our administrative assistants, some of our staff that work with students with needs in the area of occupational therapy, our teaching assistants, our folks who work custodial and maintenance. So these are the support staff that we have that are non-teaching members of our staff.
Mm-hmm.
And this piece is critical for us. And again, like I said, a lot of what we'll need in this area will depend on how we open up in the fall and what we need in terms of support. Right now, as we'll talk about in the Return to Learn piece tonight, none of the guidance has changed from the health department, and so we still have a tremendous amount of challenge keeping our buildings going with the additional constraints that this situation has put on our staff. And so knowing the numbers of teaching assistants, administrative support, specifically health clerks and nurses, those things might change as we evolve and figure out the best way for us to open up with kids next year. So this is a preliminary plan based basically on what our needs are at this point moving forward. We know, again, in the area of special education that there is going to be some additional need in the area of occupational therapy due to the needs on our students' IEPs, but it's very minimal. And so if there are any questions with this, we'd be happy to entertain them now, although this is not a final proposal, it's just a beginning.
Any word from the health department when their guidance will be revised to reflect some of the new guidance that CDC seems to be issuing and things we're hearing?
Not yet, but the discussions are starting around the county, especially in terms of looking at new guidance and preparing for when the new guidance might be issued, specifically regarding the social distancing requirement of 6 feet. There has been some conflicting guidance this whole time. Our local health department has been a non-negotiable 6 feet. The CDC has always had sort of a range, 3 to 6 feet, and the Illinois State Board of Education has had up to 6 feet as much as possible. So we've been working with a few different sets of guidance, but definitely have been adhering to the Lake County Health Department, as that is our local health department, and that is the one that's most relevant for us to follow at this point. But no knowledge at this point of when we'll be looking at new guidance, but we are preparing for it.
Thanks.
And that certainly will affect how our facilities are used, the staffing we'll need, the amount of students that can be in, all those aspects.
So I segued out a little too early. Were there any other questions on the non-licensed staffing plan? If not, we can move on to the district calendar conversation.
Okay, Shelley, would you mind showing the calendar?
I
Or do-
lost my screen.
Oh, she lost her screen. Give me 1 second.
Sorry.
That's all right. I'm going to get it here for us. So we are presenting the final district proposed calendar for next school year. I'm going to share my screen. I don't know how big I can make this for everyone to see. Oh, wait, this is really hard for me to do on here. Okay, so our first institute day would be
It's in a board pack.
August 20th. I'm sorry, Mark?
I'm sorry, I was just going to say it's in our board packet if people would prefer to
Yeah.
look at it that way.
It is in the board packet, but for our community, yep. So August 23rd would be our first institute day, so 2 days in August with our half-day start on the 25th. And you can see our final day would be June 7th with our emergency days in the calendar, June 8th through the 14th. In terms of emergency days and still including those in the calendar, we are still including them. We know that there's a little bit of talk back and forth about, you know, whether or not we'll need to use weather-related emergency days anymore, or if we could shift to a fully remote platform and not add on those days to the end of the school year. It's a great thing that we have. It's a great part of our system. As a calendar committee, we did talk about the fact, though, that there might be instances when we might not be able to shift and have everyone have the materials and all the things they might need for emergency remote learning. And so we felt like it would be important, at least for next year, to still keep those in the calendar and have that option to call a traditional no school snow day if needed. And we felt like we weren't prepared to shift to a fully remote platform. You can see our Thanksgiving, winter, and spring breaks are similar times as they have been, and our early release days are also in the calendar as well.
Does our calendar align?
questions?
Does the calendar align with the high school calendar for vacations and stops and starts?
Yes, we've used the same process that we have in the past. Lake Forest is definitely shifting, as you know, towards first semester before winter break and then having the final exams before winter break. There's definitely an acknowledgement, I think, in their planning that the semesters aren't going to be exactly equal, but we do stick with their winter break and their spring breaks, and we've been kind of making sure that we're aligned that way for our families. So yes, we've been in communication with them about all of our calendars, and we're now in discussion about our 22-23 calendar.
Does this calendar go under the assumption that our kids will be in the buildings full time next year, or is there any consideration for remote learning?
There's still consideration for that aspect of it, but this assumes that we're back to a regular schedule. I don't see us having to change our opening day like we did this year. This year we had to push back our date a little bit because we weren't quite ready to have kids in the building on our original start date, so we moved it back a week. This is our proposed first day of school, and we plan on sticking with that regardless of how it looks in the fall.
Any other questions on the calendar? Not hearing any. We'll now move to the superintendent evaluation tool update.
Do you want to look at the board meeting calendar real quick?
Oh, sorry, did I skip that? Yes.
Yeah. So this again is just a proposed calendar for our meetings. Mark, do you want to give some history on this?
It's very similar year after year. I'm targeting the conversation here to future board members who I happen to notice are watching tonight. Year after year, we typically have 2 meetings a month, committee of the whole on the first Tuesday and a regular meeting on the 3rd or 4th Tuesday of the month, and it's pretty consistent month after month. I think there's 2 or 3 months in the year that we only have 1 meeting, and there has not been a lot of fluctuation in the pattern you see here in the 10 plus years I've been on the board. I'm not sure what else to add to that.
And there is a little flexibility we have in there to have special meetings or things like that.
Sometimes we do cancel a meeting if we're ahead of ourselves in terms of covering all the content, so. We do have to have at least an action meeting every month so that Jay can pay the bills. That's kind of the bare minimum, because we have to all approve the bills every month. I don't think I have anything
Any
else to add.
questions on that?
Okay, then now we move on to that superintendent evaluation tool update.
Okay, great. So really quickly, we had talked about a timeline for my evaluation this year, and I just want to review that really quickly. So we talked about a mid-year sort of informal evaluation that happened in December, in late January, and now, beginning of February, we've been setting up the new tool. As I promised, I created a cheat sheet for the board that was included in your packet. The red items are the items in the new system. All the items in black are from the previous superintendent evaluation. So all the criteria from the previous evaluation tool have been put into each of the categories in the new tool, so that when you go into the system and need to provide feedback in any of those big areas, you have some indicators that you have used in the past that line up with those big goals. So that is in your packet tonight. And then we would discuss, which we will do tonight, my goals and look at the competencies that will be evaluated this year. And then I'll be completing my self-assessment late this month, and hopefully in early March, you will be able to get into the system and complete your individual evaluations. And then by the last meeting in March, you'll be able to hopefully come to a final agreement on the evaluation so that that is complete before April. And also, Shelley's been working with the Super Eval admin folks and has created a training video that she will send out tomorrow. My self-evaluation isn't ready for you to go into yet, but you'll be able to get into the system and start to take a look around.
Great.
So with that, I'm going to really quickly share my view. There are 3 goals that I've outlined so far that include an evaluation of student performance based on the available assessments, curricular goals for the year, and rates of attendance. The second goal is a review of curriculum and instruction, and sort of talking about the curriculum and services that we have been providing and the implementation of our Guaranteed Viable program for the school year and how that's gone. And then finally, a board report that would include some information on student performance and recommendations based on my review of curriculum and instruction. And that would be done later this month. Obviously, when we talk about assessments, we are not going to have the assessments that we traditionally have. So I'll talk about that a little bit later in my update on assessments, but certainly have been working with our principals on the current curricular programs, the methods of instruction that we've been using this year, on the work that they've been doing to align as much as possible with the best practices that they've been working on. So those are the customized goals, and those are based off the goals that were included in my contract. Any questions on those?
Just a logistical question. Does the program allow for more than or less than 3, or does it have to be 3?
It does not have to be 3. It could be more than that or less than that.
All right.
But I wrote 3 because I have essentially 3 goals that were written into my contract.
I'm not commenting on that, on your choices. I just was curious.
Yep. And then in the system, these are the evaluation competencies that are available. And I believe they're all appropriate, and I think there would be evidence toward each of these. So relationship with the board is the first big category. And then obviously you can see the small subcategories. And so in each of these, A1, A2, A3, et cetera, there will be evidence uploaded into the system for you. Sometimes that looks like a link, sometimes it looks like a PDF, sometimes it might be some other artifact that would go to maybe a schedule of communication that would go toward that, as well as a small narrative of my own self-reflection on each area. So relationship with the board, community relations, and staff relationships. which both I think are important and have been integral to our work this year. Business and finance, obviously, which we keep going with, even more so this year, and then instructional leadership. So I think all of them are relevant. I think when you look at that sheet that includes the 60-odd criteria that you have used in the past, there are definitely some of the items on your tool in the past that might or might not be applicable, but I think that each of these big areas is, and each of these subcategories has been applicable, and there is some information then that you've used in the past that you might be able to comment on as well, either for goals for improvement or other things that you'd like to see or other things that you'd like to highlight.
So Lisa, the items in red on the you call the crosswalk, would be well suited to adding into the comments section on each one of these, if there are things that need to be added.
Actually, the items in red is what you're looking at right here.
Oh, sorry.
These are the items in red. Yep. And then the items in black underneath those are the ones that you might add in.
Okay.
And again, when we send you the little video tomorrow, you'll be able to go into the system and you should be able to take a look around and start to see what the system looks like. But essentially, when you get my self-evaluation, you'll have each of these areas with evidence and a reflection for you to comment on individual areas, or you don't have to, but you will have to rate each of these areas. And then once you're done with your rating, the system will generate a final rating based on what you put into the system, and you can adjust at that point as well. So I completed a really preliminary self-evaluation just to see how it would work, and I rated myself on each of the areas. And when I was done and I sort of came to that last screen, it would calculate a final rating, but it also gives you the option to adjust any of the areas of the final rating at that point.
Okay. Any other questions for Dr. Leali on that?
No, all looks good.
So now we go to our return to learn update.
Okay. So we are so happy. Again, we've had our kids in. Our teachers are working really hard. As you know, our big focus right now is our educators and obtaining vaccinations for them. So as we've talked about, that we've been working as superintendents in Lake County as a group collectively to staff and support 2 educator closed vaccination pods, which means that they are only available to educators in Lake County. They are available to educators who work and or live in Lake County. So not just folks that work in Lake County, but also educators that may live here but work in other counties. So that's about 20,000 educators that the county is working on vaccinating at this point. And again, that is our focus right now, staying on top of the updates in that system, making sure our staff knows when they can go in and start to schedule. Troubleshooting those issues for our staff has been the top priority for us at this point. About 25% of our teachers at LBES have been able to schedule their first dose. About half of our educators at LBMS have been able to schedule their first dose. The system will generate for them an automatic reminder when they can go in and schedule their second dose. Again, the 2 pods are at Stevenson High School and Round Lake High School. We are so incredibly grateful for the administrative team in those buildings, for the staff, and for all of their hard work in keeping these up and running. I had reports all last week when our first teachers went through, people being so grateful because the systems are just set up seamlessly. They're staffed well. They are, people are progressing through. They're in and out in about 20 to 25 minutes, which is pretty amazing. With, if anyone has gone for the vaccination, with that monitoring period of 15 minutes after with medical personnel. So I feel really confident that our educators are being well taken care of. That being said, as Mark talked about, we are preparing as an administrative team for the adjustments that are coming down the pike in terms of guidance. And that may or may not come before our educators are completely vaccinated with 2 shots. But we are planning anyway for especially the adjustments that may be made to the social distancing requirement and any other guidance as it relates to how we use our facilities, because those are really our limiting factors at this point. It's not just keeping kids apart, but it's also, as folks know, if they've been in the building, it's if there are students with symptoms, it's removing the classroom, isolating the student, cleaning the classroom, getting the classroom back, and having our nurses work on that sort of close contact tracing and things like that. I can say with a high degree of certainty that I don't see masking changing anytime soon. I don't see us really having big groups of kids in a large space for quite some time. And I really don't see any adjustments being made to the symptom monitoring or close contact tracing. So if the physical or social distancing guidance does reduce from 6 feet to maybe 3 to 6 feet, what that means is that we will most likely have more kids or staff members needing to quarantine if we have a positive case in our schools. The reason that the 6 feet is so nice is because if everyone stays 6 feet apart, then even if you have a positive case in the classroom or anywhere in the building, you shouldn't have to quarantine many folks, because the definition of a close contact is 6 feet for more than 15 minutes or less than 6 feet. So the system that we've set up has created the least amount of close contacts within our building. If we do adjust down to get more students in, the result may be more quarantine as we monitor and still have cases within our buildings. Obviously, we're keeping a close eye on the variants and how that's affecting things. Right now, our numbers look really good. So as I said, we're planning for changes that may happen as early as this spring. I just want to publicly recognize that any changes that we make at this point will be the third implementation of a return to learn plan that we have done in one school year. And I just want to recognize that it's a tremendous undertaking to change models entirely multiple times during a school year. So our administrative team is working hard on planning. Our teachers are working hard to adjust now to the new trimester 2 expectations and the new children that have been in and the new classroom environments that they've had. And obviously another adjustment would mean adjustments to lots of the things that we just adjusted, including transportation, other pieces. So I just want to put that out there. It's a tremendous amount of work, but it doesn't mean we're shying away from it. We've been working on it for a couple of weeks, talking about how we might be able to make that shift when it becomes clear that we can and we feel safe enough to do that, because our goal is to get as close to a traditional learning model as soon as we can. And there definitely are some challenges with that, but we're working on it. And really quickly, I also wanted to hand it over to Jay to take us through a little bit of some of the problem solving we've been doing at elementary regarding arrival and dismissal.
Yeah, so I know that the principals have worked really hard to make the dismissal go more smoothly and go quicker. I've been working at the crossing, trying to make sure that our kids are safe and that our staff is safe while doing the crossing. We've had some reports that it can get a little dicey over there, and we've talked to the Lake Bluff Police Department about that, and they've come out to look at our guys and help them. I'm also working with the Lake County Sheriff's Office and looking at potentially either getting some consulting help for that, or have be able to contract with a Lake County Sheriff to come and provide some traffic management at that intersection. So we're looking at other ways to make sure that everybody is safe. We've also we've added about 25 people to our buses. We had a lot of people requesting new bus service starting with when we came back from Martin Luther King Day, and we were able to accommodate most of those people. So we would be, if needed, we would add buses, but I think it's still at this point the safest to drive kids, but we don't want to protect kids from COVID by spacing them out and then have some issues with traffic. So we're looking at all the different areas and trying to make sure that everybody can get to and from efficiently and safely.
Yeah, I do want to emphasize too, we talked a little bit through this issue with our Return to Learn task force, with our community members. We got some really nice suggestions. I've had some parents reach out. We've done a lot of problem solving and kind of hands-on looking at the situation. This is one aspect that we're challenged with. There are a lot of these types of things with a lot of sort of a domino effect, right? When you adjust one thing, then other things kind of creep up. And I do want to just put out there that, you know, we're also trying to keep an eye on instruction, making sure that our students are moving forward, that our teachers have the support they need. So each of these little issues is a little issue, but a big issue also. And so we are working on it. We hear and we want to make sure our students are completely safe coming to and from school. And we welcome the support and the input from our community to kind of help us with some problem solving on that.
So one thing I can add, if that's okay, thanks for the update on that. As someone who's experienced the pickup and drop off myself recently, my concern is not related to the time it takes. That is what it is. My concern is related to the safety, obviously, and I know it is from our administrators too. I know, Jay, when you mentioned you're talking to the police, is there any time frame on possible solution there or some additions there? Because I witnessed cars who were not necessarily there for school pickup, but were just going north or south on Green Bay Road, whip around turning lane, and had there been kids out, it would have been a problem. So I just want to publicly say I am concerned for the safety, having witnessed it, and I'm wondering what the time frame is, rather than just, you know, we're talking to,
Yeah.
you know, a little more detail would be helpful, I think.
I don't have a time frame yet. I know that we have had historically, when they can, the police will just park a car and sit out on Green Bay Road to try to slow traffic down and make them pay more attention. I know that they have been at the middle school as well, so we may be able to shift resources. I think the middle school flow is a little bit safer. And so we're talking about that. And then the Lake County Sheriff, it's just, you know, have just started the initial conversations with them. They're looking at their resources to see what they can provide. So it's not something that I expect to take a long time, but I don't have an absolute timeline for you.
So then in a follow-up, is there anything we can do as board members to try to push that issue a bit? Because I think there's a lot of community members that would go for whatever changes are necessary to make sure that something is different so kids are safe. And I think especially as it starts to get warmer and there may be more people walking, luckily it's been really cold. Anything we can do as board members, anything that you need support from us for? Because, you know, I don't want you guys, we don't want you on an island either. Just, you know, you have community support, so is there something we can do to help?
Great, thanks.
I think the offer is welcome, and
Okay.
we will think of ways if there are and communicate those. Absolutely.
Any other questions for Jay or Dr. Leali on any of this back to school stuff? Return to learn? Yeah, I just want to make one comment. I've heard anecdotally some stories about, Lisa, you sort of hinted at it before when you were talking about it's our third revision to the plan for having kids in the classroom this year and how great our staff has been. And I've heard some stories about tremendous amounts of cooperation, collaboration between our staff and our administrators. And I just want to show appreciation and publicly acknowledge how hard our staff and administrative team have worked to do all of this. As a board, personally, I've heard very little negative feedback, not more than a couple of different times. I've heard a couple of other board members who have heard some, but you know, all in all, this is widely received by the community as they're seeing how hard you guys are working and what you're doing for the kids. And so I just want to say thank you to everybody, including the members of our union who have been working very well with our administrators, and we really, really appreciate that. So thank you to all.
Same, thank you.
COVID-related expenditures, I assume that falls under Mr. Khan's purview.
It does. Share my screen here. I just wanted, now we've been updating the board with detailed lists of expenditures. You actually, as part of our budgeting process, we put about $300,000 in a contingency fund, and every month the board has been approving a resolution to move contingency out of that fund to the individual line items. So this should not be, we've been fairly transparent about it, and this shouldn't be new news, but I just wanted to kind of summarize overall where we stand and kind of where we see things going for the rest of the year. So far in total, we've spent about $233,000 in spending related to COVID. About 200,000 of that has been this fiscal year, and it breaks down about 30,000 in salaries and benefits, 45,000 in services and software and training, and then the rest in supplies, which are largely PPE and technology to both keep people safe and to do remote learning. We expect for the rest of the year that we will still have additional staffing costs. We have additional nurses on staff to handle checks for symptoms and self-certification. We also needed some additional aid support just to keep the buildings going, with some staff being out of the building with all the different procedures we have. We'll continue to need PPE and cleaning supplies. The staff vaccination sites that Dr. Leali had mentioned earlier, it's a coordination between all the school districts in Lake County. And so initially they were looking for volunteers, and then they decided that it was much better to just hire people and train them, and so that they knew what they were doing and it was efficient. And we've all agreed to sort of split the costs of administering the vaccines. So they're taking all the expenditures to run these pods that will vaccinate all of the educators in Lake County and dividing it up equally across all the school districts. So there's going to be some expenses for that coming. I think the tents were a big help in the summer or the fall when the weather was warm and we could get outside. And so we'll look to do that again in the spring. We will probably have more summer school options. I think there is going to be a need or a demand for people to keep try to keep reading and math and learning going over the summer to try to help with any slide due to COVID. And then there's potentially lots of other expenditures out there continuing for the rest of the year. We've, and just as a gauge, I've looked at some other school districts. They're anywhere from 1.5% to 5% of expenditures in COVID costs. So we're on the low end of that. I think we've done a good job at providing the services and doing what we need and keeping people safe in a smart and economical way. So I did want to mention a bit about property taxes. I think we had a lot of discussions about this at the beginning of the year when we were trying to do the budget. And I had originally put 98% collection rate in the tentative budget. And then when collections were going very, very well, and we had a lot of strong collections in that first payment, in order to balance the budget, I increased it to 99%. Right now, all in, we're at about 97.3%, and there's one more payment coming. So the 98% is probably more accurate. And versus a normal year where we collect virtually 100% of our taxes, that's about $400,000 of difference. Versus our budget, it's going to be about $300,000. So just wanted to let you know that that's how we're tracking. We should eventually collect most of this money because through tax sales and things like that. However, we are also seeing a lot more appeals. And when people appeal prior year taxes and reduce their values, and for property on which taxes were already collected, we have to issue refunds. So there will be a higher percentage uncollected than in the past. We've more than made up for a lot of that with some of the federal relief money and reductions of expenditures in other areas. We got $33,000 from the first round of CARES, or from CARES funding, the first round of, they call it the ESSER, the Educational or Elementary and Secondary School Education Relief Act. Lake County shared a lot of their federal funding with us. That was another $45,000. That's money we've received already. And then the legislature, the state, the federal government just passed another round in January of funding We've not received any of that yet, and that we can spend all the way through September of 2023. So that will fund, if we need additional technology, it will fund, educational efforts to make up for any learning loss. There's a lot of flexibility in how we can spend that money, so that's welcome. And then we have been running fewer buses this year. We've needed many fewer substitute teachers. We've had less of an opportunity to have for extra duties, sports, chaperoning events, things like that. So we've been seeing some savings there. And a little bit in instructional supplies. And then food service, we normally are spending money and all of our free and reduced kids to provide meals for families who qualify. And those are being reimbursed this year by the federal government because of some of the COVID things that were put in place. So all, net, as you'll see, next meeting, we're still on budget and doing well, but this is just kind of a summary of some of the impacts that COVID have had specifically on finances this year. And with that, I would take any questions.
That was a good overview, Jay. Thanks. You said basically you think we're going to net out pretty close to what we had budgeted for without COVID. That's great news. Good job.
So just one question, Jay. You've got roughly short 233, incremental expenses, short 300 in budget. That's 500, less the 200 or so in relief. You're still hanging out there about 200. You think you're going to make that back up in the other 4 or 5 areas at the bottom of the page?
Yeah, I mean, typically we run 12 buses for transportation, and right now we're only running 6. So there's some savings there. Even if we needed to add buses for the remainder of the year, we've gone, we'll have gone 8 months or so with the reduced load. When many of the schools were closed, there were also some special education transportation where kids are going into their schools, and that is 100% incremental. If they're not going, we don't pay anything. So we've been saving some there. Substitute teachers, we've been still having long-term subs when staff are out on leave, but the day-to-day subbing is, we've spent about $10,000 this year on subs, and typically we spend $150,000 in a year on substitute teachers. So there's some significant savings in those buckets just due to the differences in the way we're running the educational environment this year.
And if I could hop in there on the substitute issue, because we were already anticipating a substitute shortage because you've been operating with one for quite some time. And so some thinking behind the model that we've had with remote learning being the platform has supported our need for less substitutes. As our teachers have had to quarantine at home or be home with ill family members, using that remote learning platform for everybody has allowed them to continue to teach, so that we haven't needed a substitute, and we've had continuity of instruction, and then also not needing a substitute every single time a teacher is not able to be in the building. So that has helped with that as well.
Jay, I would just want to thank you for the detail. I will admit that I felt a couple of times over the past few months a little uneasy about having the COVID money transferred under the consent agenda without really getting into it very much. And so I'm glad that you provided this detail, and I would recommend we do this periodically because it's just a good thing to air out publicly. And then a side note, not related to our budget, but Jay pointed out all the money, it looks like it's upwards of $200,000 that we can spend from various CARES funding. I am your local representative to the NSSED, a cooperative for special education students who have a number of our kids there, and there's 18 member districts. They get 0 CARES funding, and yet they are expected to protect their kids in the same way we are in the buildings. And so they're running into some budgetary problems meeting those needs and funding those needs. And so I don't know where that's headed. I sit on the finance committee, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that there may be at some point this year a request for help from the member districts to help them cover their COVID expenses. That has yet to be determined, but I wanted everybody to hear that at least once before it happens. So,
That's a good point, Mark. And those are our students, so we would be paying for that if they were in our buildings. And so I think it's fair that we help them with that.
and then if they do go that route, it would be proportioned by usage and students in the home districts. So it would be a fair proportioning, but that is yet to be determined. And I just wanted you guys to hear that before we go. That comes back in a few months, perhaps. So,
Mark, do you have any idea what, unfair question, but do you have any idea what the size of that shortfall is for them? Or what could come our way?
I have no idea what could come our way, but for the entire district, it's several $100,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 on just the COVID portion. They're having some other funding issues because enrollment is way down this year because districts are choosing to keep students home in their home districts rather than enroll or send them through an SSED program. Some of their big users, like the Glenbrooks and the Northfields, are way down. So they have some of that kind of budget problems, but they've run, I forget how many kids they have in North Shore Academy, but it's several hundred. So they have a fair amount of expense to keep those buildings safe. And they're upwards of, I want to say $300-something thousand in COVID expenses that they've got to figure out how to cover. So,
Good
but you get 18 districts that'll be spread up. If it happens that way, they're having some trouble. There's a lot of related issues that there's some thought about using fund balance to pay for that, but their fund balance is different than our fund balance. And that's a whole nother can of worms that we can get into and talk about, but it's unresolved on that front as well, as Jay knows.
It would be on the order of, a couple % of what we pay them most likely.
Yeah.
So not big numbers, but not insignificant.
Yeah. Any other questions on any of this? So I think we wrap up with an update on standardized testing for the 2021 school year.
Yes, and I do want to also thank Jay, and not with all the additional PPE and materials and supplies, a lot of work goes into making sure that those go out and that our buildings are maintained. And we've had a lot of snow recently. And if you've been anywhere near our parking lots, they are clean as a whistle and it is super safe. And his team's done a great job. So on standardized assessments.
Thank you to those guys for that big snow we got. That was a lot of work. I did my driveway by hand because my snowblower died that day. So I know it was a pain, and thank you to all those guys. That was a lot of work.
Pretty easy winter up till this point, and now the guys are just they're pretty tired. So it's been a tough couple of weeks.
Yeah, and we appreciate it. A really quick update on standardized assessment. So in the next meeting, we'll take a look at our local assessments. As you know, we implemented our MAP assessment in the fall. We brought all of our students on campus to do that assessment so that we could sort of control for some validity and reliability in that work. We have implemented the winter MAP assessment with some students so that we can get a measure of progress monitoring and kind of look at how they're doing. We plan to also implement that in the spring and take a look at any learning loss or goals that we need to make for students. We've been implementing interventions based on that and our other local assessments. So our local assessment plan hasn't changed as much. The standardized assessment, what we're talking about are 3 issues. That is our access for ELLs, assessment for students who speak a second language or are learning English as a second language. The Illinois assessment of readiness, which is the big, ISAT/PARC/ it's gone over lots of changes, but it's the multi-day standards-based assessment for the state accountability piece, and then the Illinois science assessment, which goes for 5th and 8th graders. So that is where we're looking at some changes potentially. Right now, the standardized assessments are already set. There is a window opening in March for all of those assessments to take place in person on our campuses. As you can imagine, for some districts who have had trouble getting in from remote learning or have had a bulk of their population be remote for the majority of the school year, this is a very daunting task to get students all on campus for these assessments that are multi-day and hours of assessment time. So we have signed on, I've signed on along with 600 other superintendents, or more than 600, in Illinois alone, asking for the Department of Education to grant some flexibility and waive some of these assessments for this year. I believe, as a group, of educators, we're feeling like we've been disrupted enough, and we are doing a lot of assessment, we're doing a lot of evaluating and providing feedback and intervening. We are lucky to be able to have those resources. Not every school district has those resources. Some school districts rely on the standardized assessment because it's free, and they can implement that and get some good data from it. We're in a nice position here where we can afford to have some local assessments that can be done remotely or in person, and we have a little bit more flexibility. So we are hopeful that the Department of Ed will grant some flexibility for districts who don't need to engage in the hours and days of assessment that takes. However, we haven't been granted that yet. So for right now, we're looking at March and April being a very long window of a lot of assessment for students. And again, that goes for our access students, that's anybody participating or qualifying for ELL services. And then for our 3rd through 8th graders, that Illinois Assessment of Readiness, which includes an additional unit this year, in addition to what we've done in the past. And we have also been picked special to engage in a pilot selection of questions for some of our students. So we're looking at a very, very long and great deal of instructional time spent on assessment. So we are hopeful that we will get that flexibility and we will not have to do that with our students this spring. But again, we are planning for it if we need to.
Lisa, can I ask a question? If we don't end up doing the standardized testing, which I'm not, arguing for that by any means, but what does our local assessment taking look like so that we know where our kids are at and what they need?
So the spring window for the MAP test will look a lot like the fall window did. So we'll be doing not only 2nd through 8th grade, which we did in the fall. We had our 1st graders participated in the winter so that they could get a start and see how that looks. And then all of our 1st through 8th graders will take the spring version of the MAP test, which is similar, same as fall and winter. It has a reading component, it has a math component, and we will have a measure from fall to spring for our students in math and reading. And that's a great kind of benchmark. It's great because it gives us a measure of growth. It gives us a measure of growth compared to other districts. It gives us a predictability in terms of their projections for meeting state standards based on that score. We can also enter that into our ECRA database that gives us kind of a value added measure. So whether or not students are growing at the rate they've typically grown in the past, or if they're falling a little bit behind, or what areas they might be falling behind in. So there's a lot of information we can get from that assessment because we've been giving it for so long. And there's a large database. They just redid their norms. So there's 2020 norms. And they just redid their study on projections for the standardized assessment. So there's lots of information we can get from that MAP assessment. But we also have lots of formative assessments. We're still doing independent reading inventories. We're still doing small formative math assessments. So we're in a really good position here because we started in a good position with a lot of local assessments that give us information that's relevant to our curriculum and our program. And we also are paying attention to the standards. So we feel prepared if our students need to engage in the IAR. Our curriculum is based on the standards, and we feel confident that our students will do as well as they can, given the disjointed year and the challenging year that they've had. So again, we're preparing for all of it. We'll take the data that we get from it, and as we have been this year, implement some interventions, try to look at what we've been talking about as sort of what is COVID impact, what is maybe based on other factors, because then it's sort of parsing out what was impacted by this particular situation, what may be impacted by other factors, and then looking at how we might be able to support students next year.
Lisa, I got a question for you. My personal opinion, not being an educator, is that you and your staff could spend their time a lot more effectively helping kids catch up rather than helping prep them for these damn exams. Excuse my lack of language skills there. Is there anything we could do on behalf of the board in terms of perhaps advocacy? Because this board has really not done much in terms of advocacy to help with that, or work with other school districts who are perhaps advocating for your position on those standardized tests. Does the voice of the board help in any, or could it help in any way? And if so, please let us know how we can help.
I appreciate the question, always. There's potential for that, and I'm keeping an eye out on the IASB site to see if there's ways that the boards are advocating. We are in a good position because I have been to a few meetings with Illinois State Board of Education representatives. They are on board with the flexibility, so they have already committed to whatever measure of flexibility that we're afforded as a district or as a state, they will take advantage of that level of flexibility. So they've already committed to that for the school districts in Illinois. So I feel really confident that when the Department of Education settles down and there's a little bit of a chance to identify an agenda or some goals, that flexibility will be a priority for this administration. That's at least what I've heard. And so I'm hopeful that that will get down to the state level and that we will be able to take advantage of that flexibility as a district. So, but obviously if I hear of opportunities, I will certainly pass them on.
Yeah, keep us posted. Thanks. Any other questions? Anything else from the administration? No? So I would offer the opportunity for anybody, any of our participants, the attendees, to ask questions if you would like. You need to raise your hand using the Zoom function at the bottom of your screen, and we can bring you into the room to comment or question. Shelley, is there any other written question to address the board, to the board? No?
Not at this time.
Okay. I'm not seeing any questions raised by attendees, any hands raised, but if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to email myself or Dr. Leali or anybody on the board, and we're happy to talk you through whatever comment or question you might have. Any other comments from the board? Not hearing any. I appreciate everybody's attendance and hard work, and please try hard to stay warm in this crazy weather we're having. And thank you, Dr. Leali and your team, for working so hard to keep kids, getting the education they need. We appreciate it. May I have a motion to adjourn at 8:04 p.m.?
So moved.
Second,
A roll call vote, please.
John Marsden,
yes.
Leanne Charlo, yes. Julie Gottschall,
Yes.
Richard Haig,
Affirmative.
Andy Duran,
Yes.
Ann Hill,
Yes.
Mark Barry.
Yes. All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Stay warm. Rich,
Much.
Rich,
See you
hit them
soon.
hard. Hit them long. See you.
Enjoy.
Thank you.